Good morning and welcome. Thank you, Chris, for the warm introduction. I appreciate it. So, welcome everybody to Carousel's third annual Always On Technology Symposium. I couldn't be more excited. If you look at the agenda that we have and the speakers that we have lined up with the topic of resilience and how relevant it is for all of us, I'm certain that we're all going to walk away from today with at least one gold nugget, one real piece of value for the time that we invest together in learning and growing today. As always, I like to start these things off. It's kind of tough to see the audience with the lights here, but I'd love a show of hands. How many of you have been to an Always On event before? If I can see. And how many have been to an Always On Technology Symposium before? A good many of you. And lastly, how many of you have been to, and this is the third, would have gone to all three? There are a few hands out there. I want to thank you for your support of Always On in general, the whole program, certainly the Technology Symposium that we're having today, and also welcome those that are brand new to the Carousel Always On family, if you will. Now, as the day begins today, I'm once again privileged to stand in front of you and be able to kind of set context for how the day is going to unfold. One of the things that I like to do is to kind of give you a lens to look through as you listen to the subject matter experts, the keynoters, the speakers, the Fast Five game show, and kind of frame the way that you consume the content. In the world around us, there's always lots of things happening that are important for us to digest and process and see what do they really mean to us and what can we learn from them. Those that know me know that by nature I'm kind of an intensely contemplative person. I give a lot of thought to things. In fact, my boss would probably say, you think about things too much. Is he back there? Jim back there? There he is. But I'm always looking at, certainly at trends, but I'm kind of a student of human nature, a student of history, and I like to pull things together and have kind of those aha moments. It really excites me to have an aha moment for myself, but also to help others to kind of have those aha moments materialize, really those teaching moments. Few things actually make me happier than that, if you can believe it, to make that aha moment happen. It really excites me, and you might say, well, that's really nerdy, but it's just kind of how I am. So if you'll indulge me for a moment, I'd like to share with you a bit of an aha moment that I had while preparing for the event today. So while I was doing research, I had actually come across a YouTube video. It was a TEDx talk by a gentleman by the name of Richie Edwaru. I encourage you to check it out. And it was all about blockchain. Show of hands, how many are familiar with and heard the term blockchain? We'll hear a lot more about blockchain, not today, but we'll hear a lot more about blockchain, moving forward. But it was about simplifying blockchain. And one of the things that he did, and I love when people do this, is he kind of walked through history and some of the paradigm shifts that have occurred in different eras or generations, and the inventions that enabled those paradigm shifts to happen. So if we look back at, pre-1400s, and we look at knowledge, and who was entitled to actually learn things and benefit from recorded history and knowledge that existed. And it really was something that was reserved for the privileged few, right? There was a big gap between the haves and the have-nots relative to access for knowledge. You either were rich enough to have a tutor, or you were rich enough to have access to the few handwritten recordings of history. You can picture the monks that were actually recording all these things, right? And so the less privileged, the only knowledge they really were able to get was by experience or by stories that were handed down to them from their fathers and mothers, right, or grandparents. But then in the 1400s, the printing press came along. And when the printing press was created, it really leveled the playing field because now we could mass produce and copy these things without it taking a monk, his entire life to create these cherished copies of historical manuals. Now these things could be available for anybody to spread the news, spread history, and spread knowledge. So that was a significant paradigm shift when that knowledge gap was bridged. Now, if we also look forward a little bit further, in the prior to the 1800s, in order to have power to get things done, when I say get things done, I was just in Scotland for a pleasure trip, and we were walking through St. Andrews. In St. Andrews, we did go to play golf, but we walked through the St. Andrews Cathedral ruins, and they walked out on this enormous pier that went out into the North Sea. And it was all made with these, giant, blocks of granite. And it was kind of like, how did that, this was created in like the 1500s. There were no machines back then. How did that happen? It was human beings found a way to move these stones, and how precise the engineering was on it was actually amazing to me as well. And see, prior to the 1800s and the invention of the engine, the combustion engine, all of the power that created work and made things, created and made things, came from animals or people, right? We provided all that energy, all that power, and it wasn't until the 1800s when we created the combustion engine that we now could have manufacturing companies, if you will, and that power gap was actually bridged. I'll take you one step further. If we look at there being a significant distance gap that we're constantly trying to close, everything from walking from one village to the next, we would do that on foot, and then we started getting on horses, and we'd take ourselves a little bit further out and make the gap between people a little bit closer, and then we get to horse-drawn carriages, and then trains to go from one side of the country to the other, ships to get from one continent to another, ultimately airplanes. And that was all about our ability to communicate with one another and share information. But it wasn't until the invention of the internet that we were able to significantly, basically we were able to close the gap completely, right? Because anywhere in the world now, anybody, anytime, any place, you can actually share and exchange information with due to that closing of the distance gap that was the result of the creation of the internet. So as the distance gap has been eliminated, and we now find ourselves connected to anyone, anywhere, anytime, it becomes more and more challenging to know who we can trust to engage with, right? I mean, when you just did it in your village, you kind of knew everybody. You knew all the dirt on everybody. You knew who you could trust, with a secret and not with a secret. But now you really just have no clue who might be eavesdropping, who you might be sharing information with. And so we have this problem with the globe becoming so small. Now, there are a number of ways for us to interact and partner and buy things from one another. It would seem that the next great gap that we're going to have to bridge is a trust gap. Did this move? There we go. So the question becomes, how can we be confident that those that we're dealing with are trustworthy? That they're competent, for that matter. They may not be untrustworthy people, but maybe they're not competent. That association with or partnering with them, how can we know that it won't negatively impact us just by virtue of associating with those organizations? And what I'll say to you is it's by building a 5-star reputation for resilience. This is how we bridge that trust gap. It's not enough, by the way, to simply have never had anything bad happen to you in the past, or to have never been challenged, to always have been successful. You have to show that you can handle adversity. You have to show that you can overcome challenges, that when disruption occurs, you know how to manage it, and that you have a reputation for doing that. Now, I don't know about you, but I'll always put my confidence in those who've proven that they can adapt, that they can overcome. In sports terms, and as much as it pains me to say this, I'm a New England sports fan, as much as it pains me to say this, I'd have to put my money on the Yankees right now to win the World Series. I mean, it's hard to deny when they run into what should have been a buzzsaw in the Cleveland Indians, and they go down 2-0 and come back and win that. And now here again, down 2-0, and so they've shown resilience, they've shown grit, they know how to do this. How do you bet against that? You would have confidence in placing that bet, or at least I would. Now, so today we're going to further explore this notion of resilience and look to create some aha moments together. I say further because we did dig into the concept, as Chris mentioned at the opening. We did dig into the concept in pretty great detail at the Always On Leadership Symposium back in May, right? We heard many stories describing resilience, and it often pertained to individual resilience or leadership stories, because that's the Always On Leadership Symposium, right? And perhaps maybe the best way to summarize that whole event would be a quote from Tim Hebert in a blog that he followed with, which basically was that resilience is the art of bending without breaking. He even said, it's about toughness. Knock me down 7 times and I'll get up 8. You guys remember him saying that, those that were there? But as we look at a formal definition, Google defines resilience as the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties or adversity. It's toughness. I think that's what the Yankees are doing right now. I cannot believe I'm talking about the Yankees so fondly right now. This is killing me. But again, it's undeniable. And while that is all applicable to everyone in the room, this definition here, today's look at resilience is going to be much more about technology and more of a business context. In fact, let's consider this definition from the Harvard Business Review. Resilience is the ability to recover well from setbacks, adapt well to change, and keep going in the face of adversity. Sounds fair, right? Not terribly different from the first one, but I think you can kind of overlay that onto business and technology maybe a little bit more clearly, and here it is coming from a business editorial. So it stands to reason that the first step to being resilient, since this is all about overcoming and adapting to change and surviving adversity, is to acknowledge what adversity or potential adversity exists, and then define how you might go about dealing with it, should it present itself, right? Now, dealing with it can involve everything from preventive measures, because sure, it would be great if we could prevent any adversity from happening. Although I would argue, if no adversity happened, then we would not learn and grow, from that. It's one of the great things that we do. We adapt, we learn, we grow from adversity. It's like putting iron into the fire, right? But you use preventive measures, using reactive measures. So when it does happen, how is it that I'm going to actually respond to and do something about it? And, in a perfect world, you could be very proactive about it. See that this could potentially happen and do something meaningful to embrace that and maybe turn it to your advantage. So we have ideas, at least if we do this, we have ideas of what kind of challenges we might face, and then we can be ready for them. So let's explore some of the more recognizable ones. So Mother Nature herself is a huge challenge, represents a tremendous amount of disruption and adversity. Would we all agree with that? Chris kind of talked to this a little bit. This image is so powerful. So this is California. We see what's happening with the wildfires out in California, and I know some people in the room here actually came from California and have been impacted, or people that are close to them have been impacted by this. And it's not just people's personal lives. We've all seen all over the news that there are so many people that are personally affected by this, but there are businesses that are being significantly, and there are billions of dollars that are being impacted as a result of Mother Nature's impact here. We can also look at mankind and the errors that we make. We make mistakes, right? How many have never made a mistake? Go ahead, put your hand up. Good. But it's kind of like when, the mortal enemy of the internet, the backhoe, digs up that fiber optic cable that connects to your data center, right? We make mistakes. Some of them are big and hugely impactful, and some of them are small, but mankind makes mistakes, and they can represent significant challenge and adversity. We have to deal with that. Obviously, we're faced with cybercrime, hacking, ransomware, you name it. Seems every day we're hearing about another breach bringing some company to its knees, all over the front page, all over the news every day. With how public these incidents have become, how the companies respond to these may have the biggest reputational impact of all. Would you guys agree with that? Because it's so public these days, what steps 1, 2, 3 after those breaches happen, what those are, means a significant amount to me with respect to, am I going to do business with this particular organization in the future? It's not a question of absolutely not. They've actually had something happen to them, because I would rather deal with a company that did overcome and deal with some of that adversity than the company that's actually sitting there lucky that nothing ever happened to them, and they have no clue whatsoever how they're going to handle it if and when it does happen. It's kind of like Puerto Rico. I don't mean to harp on some of this tragedy, but Puerto Rico had not had a meaningful weather event like this in decades. But Florida has. So if you just look at the infrastructure, the building codes, the things that we've done here in the continental U.S. and Florida, and the impact that hurricane had there versus Puerto Rico, significantly different. Would you all agree? But it's because, how long do you wait around, because nothing's happened to you, and not take some proactive action for what could potentially impact us? Guys, we have a problem here. Is this a test of my resilience? Actually, this is just a screenshot, so this is intentional. Everything's all set. But the reality of it is that the technology itself doesn't always work, does it? Bugs, defects, incompatibilities happen all the time, presenting us with a myriad of associated challenges that we just don't potentially see coming, right? We have to manage those. We all know what happens with talent, too. Talent issues are a significant disruption to our organizations. What happens when that one person that had the keys to the kingdom decides to move on in their careers? That one person maybe that did a custom integration for your systems on the back end, and nobody else knows about it, and they walk out the door. How much of a disruption does that represent? And finally, we often hear about systems that are absolutely crippled because of the unexpected demand that happens on, let's say, Cyber Monday, right? When that advertisement that goes out actually generated a whole lot more business than we anticipated in our systems, and we end up losing more money than we make because the systems actually go down. Now, all these challenges obviously seem to be things we should be preparing, planning for in order to be resilient, right? They're all things that could literally cause the dreaded unplanned downtime, certainly can scar our reputations, and can cost us tons and tons of money. But maybe, just maybe, you've never had any of these problems impact you in the past. So maybe you don't want to do anything about it. After all, if it ain't broke, why fix it, right? Let's face it, that's a lot of crap that could happen, but if it hasn't, nobody's forcing us to change things right now, then why should we bother? Why spend the time? Why spend the money? But I would argue there's actually one more, even bigger disruption, even bigger challenge that we also need to focus on, perhaps even the most important, and one that can totally sneak up on us. It doesn't have anything to do with us actually initiating it. It's not a mistake that we make, and that is the need to innovate, or the need to respond to innovative market disruption in a timely fashion. When somebody else does something that's going to impact your customer base and you're not ready to react to that, that is a problem. How resilient will your business be when major disruption happens in your industry? So, how many of you have neighborhood bookstores in your town anymore? Our last one just actually went out of business a couple of years ago. Corner bookstore, wonderful lady that ran it, but there's just no way to sustain staying in business, other than it being a passion for her and really a hobby that she lost money at. But when somebody like Amazon comes around and says, I want to sell books, the neighborhood bookstore is gone. No ability to adapt to that. Well, what about when Amazon says selling books isn't enough? We're going to sell everything. What happens to department stores? Or Amazon says, heck, we've got a whole lot of data center infrastructure here. Why don't we start selling that? What does that mean to us that actually have our own data centers? Now Amazon buys Whole Foods. Now we're in the grocery business. What's next? You guys are all hearing it, right? Yeah, Amazon's getting into pharmacy next, right? Who knows what will come after that? But clearly now, this is just one company, arguably the most disruptive company to business that we maybe have ever known, that is disrupting all of these different industries. So what do those industries do to respond to that? How do they become resilient in the face of those types of changes? It's not just about who our new competitors might be, but it's also understanding how customer interaction, how engagement with customers might be changing as well. So say you're an NFL franchise. We've actually had experience with a couple of franchises with this exact problem. Say you're an NFL franchise, and the league trend is that spectators would rather watch from their living rooms than go to the stadium. How many agree with that? They'd rather watch from their living rooms than go to the stadium. I hear it all the time. What do? You have to find a way to manage that disruption, which was just a change in the mindset of fans, and maybe an improvement in the way that television coverage works. It was kind of like, geez, this is kind of cool. I can have all my friends over. I've got high definition, big screens. It's almost like being at the game. So NFL franchises have had to innovate to find ways to make it so going to the game is a different experience than staying home, certainly, but you get experience there that you couldn't possibly get at home, and leveraging technology to innovate and do that. So market transition or evolution is probably the biggest challenge or disruption any of us is ever going to face. Businesses do come and go all the time, right, due to the inability to respond to these market pressures. And this happens really in all types of companies, the big Fortune companies and the small neighborhood bookstores. Now, in fact, greater than 52% of Fortune companies, of Fortune 500, they've actually merged or gotten acquired or gone bankrupt since 2000. That's huge, isn't it? Half of the Fortune 500 gone since 2000. And in 2015, it was reported that 55% of the Fortune 500 failed to make a profit. Now, this comes at a time when enterprise companies face disruption not only from evolving markets, but the threat of startups, coming in, leveraging these new technology capabilities and upending established sectors. That's greater than it ever has been before, right? So we need to have resilient technology foundations allowing our businesses to pivot quickly when needed. We can't have IT holding the business back, can we? but we also need to be innovating with that technology and become the market disruptors ourselves. That's the ideal space to be in, isn't it? Now, in the face of rapidly transforming world around us, due in no small part to things like megatrends that many of you have heard me talk about before, mobile, social, cloud, data, businesses have to innovate in order to survive, period. Being stagnant just isn't sustainable anymore. Those who don't innovate die. We've all heard these concepts before. Just look at the average lifespan of Fortune 500 companies 50 years ago. Anybody know what that is? 50 years ago. How old do you think the average Fortune 500 company was 50 years ago? Was it 100 years old on average? Show of hands. Anybody think it was 100? A few. How many think it was 75? 50? It was actually 75 years. Average 75 years old 50 years ago. What do you think it is today? Do you think it's higher, show of hands, higher or lower than 75 years old? The average Fortune company. Think it's lower than 50? It's actually only 15 years. That's crazy. That's how fast everything is moving. So if we're not in a position to actually help our companies to innovate, then we're going to be the ones that don't survive the 15 years. Forbes magazine published not long ago that since 2007, the only public companies that are actually thriving are the ones that are considered the most innovative companies in the industries. So that just goes to reinforce how important innovation is. And I think many kind of sit back and say, why is he talking about innovation? We're talking about resilience, right? Isn't that just about surviving? And I would argue that it's not just about surviving. True resilience is about thriving. And we need to embrace that as our purpose. So if we can agree that our organizations are all built on technology foundations, that we, and so I'm going to get a little tongue-in-cheek with Chris here, that we must ensure are always on, right? And that at an increasing rate, the market landscape is changing due to these technologies. Then doesn't it stand to reason that we as those responsible, we're IT professionals, we as those responsible for the technology have a considerable responsibility to ensure that the organization is resilient? If technology is in the underpinning of stability, or that's where the innovation in the future is from, don't we own that? In fact, I would argue that we need to become our organization's stewards of resilience. No matter who you are in the audience, in the building today, CIO, director, practitioner, account executive, solutions engineer, vendor executive, we need to kind of put this cape on. We need to don the mantle of steward of resilience for our businesses and recognize how we might also impact the resilience, by the way, of our customers. Because when we are interacting with one another, we potentially have the ability to positively or negatively impact their ability to conduct business too, don't we? In doing so, I think we need to maintain an awareness of what's happening around us and bring that awareness back to our organizations to keep them informed of what the possibilities are, what things we may have to deal with. We need to proactively plan for any of those challenges we identify. We need to ensure that we have visibility such that when adversity, when challenges do present themselves, we want to know about it as quickly as possible. We don't want it sneaking up on us to the point where there's just no possibility of recovering. And then we really need to have response capabilities, preferably they're well-rehearsed response capabilities, right, that we can execute whenever these things eventually, and they will, even if they haven't happened yet, they will impact us. So in the interest of maintaining and creating that awareness, that's really what AOTS is all about, right? We bring technology experts together, we bring our partners together, we bring our client community together to kind of talk about what's happening in the industry. It's about creating awareness. Let's talk today about what today's agenda is going to look like. Now, at last year's AOTS, if you'll forgive me kind of looking back a little bit, we talked about change. And since resilience really is all about how we respond to change, I thought it'd be prudent to call back to last year's topics. We discussed 3 big trends that we should all be mindful of, and in a sense, we kind of foreshadowed what we'd be talking about this year, really, when we had the event last year. Some of you will recall the first topic was digitization, and the fact that the world, everything in the world around us is either being digitized or has the potential to be digitized, such that there really is sort of like a digital thumbprint for every animate or inanimate object that exists out there. In fact, you could even, it's kind of staggering if you think about the fact that if we were to capture all of the information that exists about, say, me, across all the entities in the world, wherever those little tidbits of information might exist, and you compiled them all together, you probably have a pretty interesting digital twin of me. That's how powerful this notion of capturing every little bit of information about every little thing is becoming. Now, IoT certainly is the most obvious example of digitization at work, but even simply looking at all this information that exists about any one of us in this room is a really compelling thing. Some of that is captured manually, some of that is captured automatically, but you kind of get a sense for this notion of digitization. Now, the second piece that we talked about last year was kind of built on the first part of digitizing everything, and it was this notion of digital economy. Now, with digital economy, what we're saying is that more and more of the world is digitized around us, and that information that's captured actually has real monetary value, or the potential to have real monetary value to others. And so we pull that information together. One of the stories that I shared last year was about Nike. So Nike is not only in the sports apparel and athletic gear business, but Nike is actually in the information peddling business too. So those, anybody have a Nike Fuel Band or had a Nike Fuel Band in the audience? Nope, you're all Fitbit people, aren't you? But the Nike Fuel Bands, and Fitbit does the same thing, the tracking of people running around town on the GPS tracking, that was useful information to the consumer, the owner of the Fuel Band or the Fitbit, but that information is also captured by Nike and sold to somebody who, those who might find that information valuable. They put themselves in the information peddling business, right? Another form of revenue that never existed before, simply by virtue of capturing this information. And while that's cool, what's more compelling is how this exchange of information is becoming more and more commonplace as the distance gap is closed and these lines between our companies become more and more transparent. That's really scary, isn't it? Kind of makes you think about this trust gap that we have when these lines between our companies become so transparent. We're going to need to become more and more open. I said this last year, more and more open and agile in facilitating these transactions, facilitating these interactions to enable this digital economy. And instead of nailing these connections up full time, I think we'd prefer not to do that, right? Who wants to just leave an open pipe between themselves and any customer? We're going to need to bring these connections up dynamically and bring them right back down, and do it in a fast and secure way. This is why overcoming this trust gap is so important. And finally, last year we talked about cybercrime. $1 trillion industry that has arisen. That still blows my mind. And the acceleration of digital transformation is really what has caused this massive expansion of cybercrime. And they're no longer script kiddies hacking for fun or for reputation and bragging rights. They're more and more sophisticated. It is state-sponsored in many cases. And some of these organizations even have as much infrastructure as you all do, like help desks and call centers, to actually help facilitate the crimes. Kind of crazy, isn't it? But that's the reality of what we're dealing with today. So that was last year. Really, digitization, digital economy, and cybercrime. That was then. I'd like to bring up this year's concepts because they really do kind of address a lot of the things that we talked about last year. And it was natural that since we're talking about resilience, that backdrop is going to feed into where we are today and what we're going to talk about. We've got an amazing lineup of speakers today to create awareness in areas like networking. Now, networking hasn't always been the sexiest topic, has it? We kind of say, well, networking is really, they're the information plumbers, so to speak. But we'll be talking about networking in a big way today because let's face it, proliferation of technologies like mobility, cloud-hosted enterprise apps, next-gen analytics, that's helping to revolutionize the role of the network. It's no longer just supporting functions within IT, it's become the backbone of day-to-day business operations, hasn't it? No network. Today, no network, no business. So it stands to reason that advancements in network technologies will be paramount to our ability to be resilient. And as you'll hear today, like I said, it hasn't always been the sexiest topic. You'll hear today, especially when Erica comes up, and some of the other speakers we'll have later, I don't think there's ever been a more exciting time in the networking field than now. We're also going to discuss ways in which we collaborate, not only internally, and that's important, how we team with one another and communicate with one another in real time and non-real time. That's what enables us to be resilient. When something happens, we need to mobilize and collaborate with one another. So how we do that effectively can have a huge impact on our organizational ability to be resilient. But it's also critical that we take inventory of how we communicate with the market, how we communicate with our customers as well. That's as big and maybe even a more important piece of collaboration to be looking at. And we'll be talking about that as well. We'll certainly have a lot of conversation about security, from keynote speakers to panel discussion to breakout sessions, because it's on the front page almost daily. It represents literally the most deliberate, dynamic, and focused challenge we will all continue to face in technology. And finally, we'll talk about cloud and its role in BCDR for sure, as well as collaboration and commerce in general, as it's always at the forefront of everybody's minds today. Now, we're going to hear a lot about a lot of cool technology today. We're going to meet a lot of experts, not only the experts that are on stage or in breakout sessions. If you have the time to kind of mingle around and meet people, we've got a myriad of experts from our vendor partners as well as from Carousel in general that are here. Meet them, get to know them. There is an immense amount of expertise that is here in this building today. But in the interest of fostering resilience and embracing that identity of stewards of resilience, I would challenge each of you to write down these following 3 terms. So if you can use your pads there and take your pens out, because I would like you to actually have these in the forefront of your mind as you attend any session or listen to any topic. The first is business resilience. While I'm listening to this speaker and contemplating this topic, how might it help my business to be more resilient in its industry? If you have trouble kind of contemplating that, consider for a moment if one of your competitors had embraced that technology fully, how might that become a competitive disadvantage for you? And then flip that on its head and say, well, maybe if we invested in this, how might this allow us to be the disruptors rather than be disrupted? The second is IT resilience. How might this technology improve IT's ability to be resilient, to quickly adapt to the changes and challenges that might present themselves? Perhaps some of those adverse situations we discussed earlier, Mother Nature, so on and so forth. You know, redundancy, backups, monitoring, response, all those kinds of things that could potentially weigh into that topic if we decided to embrace that. How might IT's reputation within the business be enhanced by investing in this technology? So consider that as you listen to the speakers. And then finally, career resilience. What's in it for me? How might I be ensuring that my skill set is enhanced, or I'm better able to respond to any new challenges or demands placed upon me as a result of becoming aware of or educated about this technology today? So I would challenge you, as you're listening, just kind of have those things written on a piece of paper in front of you and process that for yourself. I think it'll be an important way to help you get even more out of the day today. In closing, I'd like to stress that as stewards of resilience, each and every one of us has the opportunity to significantly impact reputation and to bridge that trust gap we discussed earlier. Today's going to be a wonderful opportunity to get exposed to new concepts and technologies that can help us all to do just that. I personally look forward to sharing and taking this journey with all of you as we look to build that 5-star reputation for resilience for ourselves, our departments, and for our organizations. Thank you very much, and enjoy the day.